Warning, this episode was recorded in the middle of November of 2017. Due to the nature of the topic being discussed, some of the information is only accurate as of November of 2017. Since this episode is being released much later, we apologize for any errors and now outdated information. I missed. Oh dear. Hey, welcome to the GNAPcast. My name is David.
And my name is Seth, and today we've got another Explains episode. So the last time we did this, I was explaining the universe of Mass Effect to David.
Which was incredibly interesting.
Oh, it's fantastic. So we're going to flip that this week, and David is going to be explaining to me and the rest of you guys listening.
Also Mass Effect. I'm just kidding.
Mass Effect.
If I tried to explain Mass Effect to everybody, we'd be here for like 30 seconds and I'd get everything wrong. As much fun as that would be. Well, you'd have to correct me on everything, and that might take a full episode. But
yeah, we've already done a full episode of that. So,
no, but the topic for today is going to be what is known as speedcubing, or
speedcubing.
Yes, speedcubing it's kind of like a competition-based thing. If you've ever heard of like cup stacking, it's very similar.
So you stack cubes?
No. Instead of like going through a pattern of the cup stacking, where you have to do like the 3-6-3 and then 6-6. 1-10-1, whatever that is. Here, you're just solving a Rubik's Cube as fast as you can.
Oh, okay.
So it's literally, cubing, which is solving a Rubik's Cube for speed.
I didn't know that was the verb for solving a Rubik's Cube.
Well, I mean, not many people seem to know that, but, if you're a speed cuber or a cuber, then you do speed cubing. You solve Rubik's Cube quickly. So I do cubing in my spare time.
Fair enough.
It's a hobby of mine. It's been a hobby of mine for like 5 years now, almost.
Oh, wow.
I've only been to 2 competitions at this point. I'm going to a third one very soon, in like a couple weeks or something like that, which will be interesting. So am I very good at it? I'm better than many people, but I'm not like a world-class speed cuber or anything.
Fair enough.
But for some explanation, so if you're familiar with the typical Rubik's Cube, it has 9 stickers on each side, which is 9 pieces on each side per se. You've got your centerpiece, you've got edge pieces, and then corner pieces around it.
Yep.
Cubers don't call them stickers because on each piece, you don't think of it as 2 separate stickers. Like the corner piece, for example, if you can picture a Rubik's Cube, on the corner you've got 3 stickers, but they're all on the exact same piece, technically. So
True.
So the way we view it is you're solving pieces rather than solving by stickers. So in that sense, if you have like a centerpiece, there's only 1 sticker there. So you're going to align everything based off the centerpiece because that's what color the side is.
Gotcha.
It's a very hard explanation to do over like a podcast setting. I would love to be like showing this as a demonstration, like a YouTube video or something like that. But,
maybe one day we'll get to the point where we can video this.
Right. But so for a Rubik's Cube, a traditional Rubik's Cube, because there's like, a 3x3 grid on each side per se, like 9 stickers, it's called a 3x3 puzzle.
Okay.
So we don't use like Rubik's Cubes per se. We use speed versions of Rubik's Cubes.
So what's the difference between a regular Rubik's Cube and a speed cuber's Rubik's Cube?
Okay, if you've ever held a regular Rubik's Cube and tried to turn it, you know how hard it is to turn. It takes a lot of force to turn. And if you have a layer misaligned ever so slightly, like turned a little bit, and you try to turn a different layer, it won't go.
Ooh.
It gets stuck.
Or you break the Rubik's Cube.
And that's kind of like trying to run the 100-meter dash wearing cement-filled boots. If that's a good explanation.
That sounds like a terrible idea.
Suffice it to say, you're not going to go very fast and you're going to have a hard time.
Fair enough.
So speed cubes are specifically designed, they're usually like Chinese knockoffs, to be honest. That's how most people view them. But they're specifically designed such that they can turn really quickly, usually with not very much effort. So you can use just like one finger rather than your entire arm or entire hand to turn it.
Interesting.
And if you have a layer slightly misaligned, you can still turn another layer because of what's called corner cutting. Basically, that means like right around the centerpieces or in between the pieces, there's larger holes, which allows it such that when you have a layer and you try to turn it, the other layer will like snap into position based on how the puzzle is made. It's actually really cool.
Interesting.
It's very hard to describe just, again, with words.
Yeah, I'd imagine so.
So speed cubes, which is what we use, they can range anywhere from, you can get some low-end speed cubes for cheaper than a Rubik's brand cube, which is funny because they turn way better than a Rubik's brand cube. Like you can get some speed cubes for like $5 online.
Is that all?
That's all. And
Wow.
Rubik's cubes themselves are anywhere from like 10 to 15, depending on where you find them. Like if you go to Walmart, it's like 10 to 12 bucks at this point, I think.
Why would you buy a Rubik's Cube from Walmart?
Well, if you're trying to give it to your nephew as a Christmas present,
Fair
maybe.
enough.
I don't really know.
So I was looking at a statistic a while back that said with a standard Rubik's Cube, like a 3x3 like you're talking about, you can get over 4 quadrillion combinations of colors and pieces.
Close. It's 43 quintillion, which is another.
Okay,
like,
that sounds
1,000
even
times
worse.
larger. So it's 43 with like 20 some zeros behind it. I don't know. It's ridiculous enough. I think the statistic goes that if you cover the entire Earth with Rubik's cubes, you can get it such that it's like however many miles covered the entire surface with, one Rubik's cube in each of like the different scrambled permutations or something like that. Or it would reach from the Earth to the sun 1,000,000 times or
Wow.
I don't know. It's
So how in
something
the
ridiculous.
world do you get to a point where you can solve something like that in a couple of seconds?
Well, I'm not at a couple of seconds, suffice it to say. Like my fastest official time is 11 and a half seconds.
Even so, that's
which is
pretty
decent.
fast.
But it's actually, it's a very method-based thing, and it's also entirely muscle memory. I don't have to sit and think about it. I don't have to be smart to solve it per se. Like when I first started, it was a lot of thinking and me like, what in the world am I trying to do here? But it's all algorithm based. And when I say algorithm, I don't mean running math computations, which is what algorithms usually mean. When I say an algorithm, that's like a sequence of moves. So like, for example, a very common algorithm is what's known as the soon, or people like to pronounce it soon, but it's the soon, where you
Okay.
turn the right side clockwise, you turn the top side clockwise, right counterclockwise, top side clockwise again, right clockwise, the top twice, which is 180 degrees, and then the right side counterclockwise. Suffice it to say, that's only like 7 moves, but it does a very specific thing. And you don't always know how it does the specific thing. That's the point of the algorithm. It's just a very efficient way to do what you want it to do.
Okay.
So when you solve a Rubik's Cube, I'm just going to talk about like the standard Rubik's Cube or the 3x3 Rubik's Cube. When you're solving that, like the most common method is what's known as the Friedrich method, or CFOP, which basically
CFOP.
that stands, well, it's CFOP, which stands for cross, F2L, orient last layer, and permute last layer. And so to break that down, that's the method that I currently use. There are many others. There's many different ways to solve
Oh,
them.
I can imagine.
This one's the most popular for speed. You start off by, so I kind of described how there's like a centerpiece on each side where it only has one color, whereas like an edge piece has 2 stickers per se on it, and a
Right.
corner piece has 3. So you start off with your centerpiece, like I'll start with the green. Many people start with white. If you're color neutral, you start with any color, which is kind of unfair because I can't do that because I'm not color neutral. But what you do is you put all 4 edge pieces, which makes a plus, around that center. So you're just kind of ignoring the corners at this point. And when you do that, you have to line up them with like if it's a green, you have to put all the green edge pieces along with their other centers, and you just basically build a plus on the bottom.
Okay.
The next step is called F2L, which basically means first 2 layers. So here, because you already have the cross, you're doing the bottom corner as well as the edge that's in the middle layer right above it, if that makes sense.
I think so.
You're doing those 2 pieces, and there's 4 of them. And once you do all 4 of those pairs, which it takes a while to learn, there's methods called intuitive F2L where you learn like 3 different ways that they can show up in relation to each other, the corner and the edge piece. And then you just learn everything from there on your own. Then there's a bunch of algorithms that if you wanted to learn, nobody ever does because there's no point, because you can do it intuitively and it's actually easier to learn. But once you're done with that, you get the bottom 2 layers, and all that's left in your cube is now the top layer, which is like if I start with green, it's now the blue side, because green and blue are opposite, red and orange are opposite, and yellow and white are opposite in the standard color scheme.
Okay.
There's a Japanese color scheme which yellow is next to white, and it's just so confusing.
Oh no.
But anyways. So when you get to your last layer, the step that's called OLL, or orient your last layer, you do one of, I believe there's 57 different cases. You only do one per the solve. That puts all of the last layer's stickers that are that color on the top. Now it might not fix all of the pieces in the right spot, but it'll put all of the blue, like if I start with green, it'll put all the blue stickers on top. And then the next step, which is PLL, there's 21 different cases where you move them around. You keep blue on top, but you move like 2 corners and 2 edges, or you move 3 corners or 3 edges or things like that. So in that sense, the way I described it just now, it sounds very complicated.
It does sound very complicated.
It does seem complicated, but suffice it to say, there are much easier ways to do it. Now that's a method for speed. That's one where you dedicate 10s to 50s to hundreds of hours just practicing.
Man.
But you don't start just with that method. You can start with the much easier method and work your way up to it. For example, I taught my girlfriend over the summer how to solve a Rubik's Cube using a much easier method. The method that she used, you also start with the same cross because that's very simple to do. But then instead of doing what's called F2L, you split that up into two very easy steps where you put the corner in and then you put the edge in later. You do that all around. So you put all your corners in, you get the bottom layer, and then you put all your middle edges in, which is just 4 middle edges. You put your middle edges in, and then we get to the last layer. Instead of there being like 57 different cases, which I spent all of Christmas break last year learning, which was a lot of fun. I did it in 3 days. It was 3 intensive days, but I did it.
Yeah, that sounds like a crazy day.
That's how Kevin Hayes did it, and I'll get to some of those people later. But instead of doing that, you split it up into a bunch of different steps. So instead of doing 2 steps that you use one of 50 algorithms and then one of 20 algorithms, which is just like 80 some algorithms to learn.
Yeah.
There's like 2 cases that you learn to put a blue plus on top, or whatever your last color is, sometimes yellow. And once you do that, then there's like a couple cases, again, that you have to recognize. You do the same algorithm that'll move the right pieces around. So instead of doing the last layer, this is hard to describe. Instead of doing the last layer in just 2 steps, you're going to do it in like 4 or 5. But each one will solve just a small part of it rather than an entire section, like what I do for speed. So you only end up learning like 6 algorithms. And 2 of them are actually the same algorithm. You just apply it slightly differently in a different location, like step 2 and step 7.
Gotcha.
So it's actually very easy to learn. And my girlfriend, who's actually sitting over there in the studio, can attest to that. No, it's fairly easy to learn. Like pretty much anybody can learn how to do it. It's kind of like, for a very silly example, it's kind of like running a mile in the sense that almost everybody physically can run a mile. Now, are you gonna run it in 5 minutes? Probably not. Even I can't run a mile in 5 minutes.
I would not like to try at this point.
No, but it's the sort of thing where, I mean, if you spent a little bit of time getting your body in shape, and if you tried running like a couple, if you like run for a little bit here and there, you can eventually work yourself down or up, whichever way it is, to running a mile. And it's, and then once you've run the mile, like, oh, that wasn't nearly as hard as I thought it was.
Yeah.
It seems very daunting at first because it seems like such a hard or impossible task. And the same goes with the Rubik's Cube, where you just kind of have to like condition yourself, but not condition. You just got to learn how to do it or be taught. Or
I think that's still conditioning, though.
Right. Like, I mean, I could teach you, not in the course of like 2 minutes how to do it, but if I sat down with you for like an hour and a half, I could teach you how to do it. And if you then kept it up and kept like practicing per se, or just kept solving it, you'd be able to solve it. Now, you wouldn't be able to do it at a speedcuber level.
Right.
And that's where speedcubing as a community as a whole is way different than just solving a Rubik's Cube. Because when it comes to speedcubing, now you're solving it for speed. Now the goal is to run a mile as fast as you can, except you're solving a Rubik's Cube. So the format for that, are you familiar with like speed stacking? I asked that earlier, but are you familiar with like how the sport itself goes?
For the most part.
Like, you know how you do the speed stacking, but there's that mat that you use where you have your hands down. You use that same mat for Rubik's Cube solving as well. Yeah, it's got that little foam mat as opposed to a hard table, so that if you drop your cube or like set your cube down kind of hard, it doesn't damage the cube. And then it has this little timer that's got little pressure pads. So if you put both of your hands on it and wait half a second, the light will like blink red and it'll turn green. And as soon as you lift up one of your hands from a pressure pad, the timer starts. So then, you have to use both your hands or use one hand, which is another event that I'll get to later. And then as soon as you have both of your hands back down on the mat, the timer stops.
So hang on, these mats are made specifically for speed challenges like this?
Yes, they're made specifically for speed stacking and speed cubing. And I think there's a couple of things as well, but I forget what they are. But those are definitely the most common uses. I myself have one, except that my timer is currently out of batteries. So I need to go get a new battery and replace it. So in a competition setting, not only do you have a 3x3, which is your standard Rubik's Cube, but then there's a 2x2, which is like just the corners of Rubik's Cube. Mm-hmm. And then there's a 4x4, where instead of it being 3 across, 3 down and 3 sideways, whatever, there's 4 across. So here you've got, instead of 1 centerpiece, there's 4 centerpieces, and there's a bunch of edges. They have in competition all the way up to 7x7, or
7.
Technically 7x7x7 if you want to go 3 dimensions, but we just call it 7x7.
Wow.
Which, I mean, the world record on 7x7 right now is like a 2:06.
2 seconds?
No. 2 minutes and 6
Okay.
seconds. My fastest is 6 minutes and 7 seconds, but it was a terrible solve. But that's a different story.
Even so, I was about to be really impressed if somebody solved that.
No. No.
Oh, wow.
But so not only is there like 2x2 up through 7x7, but then they have other events as well. Like there's a pyramid, which is called a pyraminx. Instead of it being a cube shape, it's a pyramid shape.
Pyraminx.
Yes.
That sounds like a username.
It kind of does, actually. But that was actually invented, like Erno Rubik is the guy who invented the Rubik's Cube, hence Rubik's Cube. It's Rubik's, like Erno Rubik's Cube. It's his cube. As opposed to Seth's Cube, it's Rubik's Cube.
Oh.
But that's why they call it a Rubik's Cube.
What if I want a cube?
Then you'd have to call it Seth's Cube. It'd still be Rubik's Cube because he's got a trademark or something like that. But even before,
Someday.
But before he actually invented the Rubik's Cube, a guy named Heyyy Meffert invented the pyraminx. but he didn't know that it'd be a great puzzle, so he didn't market it. He just had it invented. And then when Erno Rubik had released the Rubik's Cube in like 1974 or 76 or whatever year it was, then Meffert was like, wait, I can do that too. So he released his Pyraminx. So when people say Rubik's Triangle, that is entirely false because it's actually Meffert's Pyraminx. There's no such thing as a Rubik's Triangle. But
that wouldn't make sense anyway because a triangle only has 2 dimensions.
Right, but they also sometimes call it Rubik's Square or something like that, like the square cube. And it's like, wait, no, what?
Yeah, that's a little redundant.
Yeah. Then other puzzles that they have, there's something called a Megaminx, which also kind of sounds like a username now that I think about it.
A username.
As opposed to being a pyramid or a cube, this one's a dodecahedron. So instead of having like a triangle on each face for 4 faces or a square on each face for 6 faces,
it has a pentagon?
It's a pentagon for 12 faces.
How do you even solve something like that?
You actually can solve it almost the exact same way as a Rubik's Cube. It just takes a little longer, a lot longer.
Yeah, there's more pieces.
There's 5 corners on each side as opposed to 4. But other than that, it's like exactly the same.
Wow.
So surprisingly, it's not nearly as difficult as people might think. But at the same time, all of these puzzles, for the most part, you have to know how to solve a Rubik's Cube. Except for maybe Pyraminx, because that one's actually really easy. But all of these, if you know how to solve a Rubik's Cube as a starting point,
so
you can go on.
You basically have to know what you're doing in order to be able to do it.
Well, yeah, that's how things work in life, isn't
Generally.
it? You have to know what you're doing.
Sometimes you can pretend you know how things work.
I do that all the time. But then there's other events where there's an event called a Skewb.
Skewb.
S-K-E-W-B.
Skewb.
Basically,
Zoinks!
It's got the same core as a Pyraminx, but instead of it being a Pyraminx, it's a cube shape. It's just really weird, where 4 of the corners are the same corners as a Pyraminx, and the other 4 can float around. It's a very weird puzzle.
Wow.
It's extremely hard to describe, but people can solve it really quickly. Like the world record is 1.1 seconds on that. The world record, by the way, for Pyraminx is 1.28 seconds, I believe, set by a Canadian. It was recently 1.32, and the world record average is like just over 2 seconds, set by a guy just in Xenia, which is just down the road from where we are right now.
Wow.
He's a high schooler. His name is Drew Brads, and he's basically the best Pyraminx solver in the world at the moment. He's won the world championships and the U.S. Nationals
as a high
times.
schooler.
As a high schooler. Well, many cubers are actually high schoolers or just a couple years older than I am right now. Like the guy who...
Fair enough.
One of the guys who won, I don't know if he won like a world record recently, if he set a world record recently, or if he like won a competition recently, he's like 23. That's about as old as people are getting. Most of them are between like 10 and 20. 25 maybe at most. Some people are older.
You hit 24 and you just get arthritis in your hands and you can't do anything anymore.
It's just that all these blasted kids keep coming in with their faster methods and their faster cubes. I'm kidding entirely.
Darn kids.
I know. But then other puzzles, or I guess other events in competition, they have 3x3 one-handed, which is exactly what it sounds like. You solve it with one hand. So you have both hands on the timer, but then you can only touch the cube with one of your hands. Now, obviously, you're slower. My best solving competition is 18 seconds as opposed to 11, which is still really good for me. I usually average like 25.
Oh, but fair enough.
But the world record on that is 6.8.
6 seconds.
6 seconds one-handed.
Almost 7 seconds to solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand.
That's literally faster than I've ever done on my own with 2 hands. But that's because it's Felix Zemdegs, who is one of the world's best cubers. I'll touch on the cubers in a bit. I want to round out some of the events as well.
So how do you solve a Rubik's Cube with one hand? Like, did your strategy change a lot?
A little bit. The method is almost the same. You just sometimes you alter some of the like algorithms so that way you can execute it easier with just the one hand. But basically you hold it entirely between, like if you're right-handed, you generally hold it between your left or in your left hand because the algorithms are easier to execute with your left hand. Everybody does it left-handed for the most part. Like that's just how it works. That's how I do it. Basically, you hold it between your thumb and your middle and ring finger. That's where you hold the cube. And then your pointer finger can move the top layer forward and backward by flicking it or pushing it.
Sure.
And then your pinky finger can move the far right layer.
Ooh, you have to have a really dexterous pinky finger for
that
to work.
But the thing is, if you practice for a long time, your pinky gets extremely tired because in normal solving, you almost never use your pinky based on how you hold the cube. So practicing one hand can be very tiring, and I don't do it as much as I probably should, to be honest.
See, that sounds like a guitar method. I play guitar, and that's the finger that I don't use very often, and so that's the one that needs to work harder.
Right, it's also one of your weaker fingers, with maybe the exception of the ring finger. But with the ring finger, you're almost always using your middle finger for support as well. But that's how you solve it generally, one-handed. There's also, you can do it slightly different ways, but that's the most common way to do it. Other events that we have, there's 4x4 blindfolded, 3x3 blindfolded, and 5x5 blindfolded. where basically this time, instead of getting, which I should have mentioned this before, you get 15 seconds of inspection per solve. Like you can look at it for 15 seconds, whatever puzzle, and then you have to start your timer or else you get a penalty. For blindfolded solving, you start the timer, and as soon as you move your hands, then you can look at the puzzle. So you can remove the cover on top of it. So your inspection time, where you look at the puzzle, counts as part of your solve time.
Oh.
And in this sense, you have to look at it, but then you can't make any moves. You just can only look at it. And then as soon as you think you're ready, you pull down a blindfold. Someone will stick a piece of paper in front of you just to help prevent cheating because of a debacle at the 2007 World Championships where someone was cheating. But
Of course.
But then as soon as you pull down your blindfold, you solve it, and as soon as you think you're done, you set it down and stop the timer, and then you can remove your blindfold. Basically, you have to memorize it and then solve it without looking at it.
That doesn't sound as difficult as maybe it would have before we start. I mean, if it's all muscle memory, it shouldn't be that hard to solve it without using your eyes.
Yes and no. In that sense, it's actually not terribly difficult, but you do have to have practice it, and you have to have a decent memory. But the strategy changes entirely, because if you were to try to solve it the normal way, where you start with the cross and then F2L and then your OLL and PLL, your last two layers, if you're doing that blindfolded, you have no idea what last layer algorithms you're going to get.
Oh, that's true.
It's almost impossible to predict that, just because, there's 43 quintillion different arrangements for a Rubik's Cube. So this way, so I'm going to try to describe it, but it's going to be very hard to describe because, you listening, you're not a cuber. Most people listening might not be cubers. This will be hard to understand. But so, for example,
try anyway.
Okay, so one of the algorithms for PLL, which is that last step where all of the colors on top are the same, is called the T-perm. Basically, what that does is when you're holding the cube in front of you, your front right upper corner, so like the corner on the top layer, your front right corner and your back right corner will switch, but the blue sticker will stay on the top. And your middle two edges on the top will switch as well. So like not the one that's in front closest to you and not the one in the back. So basically, it's like a sideways T,
Okay.
where you've got your two corners on the right, and then you've got your edge in between those two, and then another one on the far side. That's what's known as a T-perm. It's very easy to execute. The way you execute it doesn't seem to make sense, except that when you're done executing it, you've swapped those pieces. That's just how that works.
Oh.
And that's how a PLL works. There's 21 of those. So the method here, this is a very slow method. It's the one that I use. It's not a fast method at all. But the way that it works is because one of those edges is trapped between the two corners, the other one is actually entirely unaffected by those corners. So you can move that piece out of the way. You can move any other edge piece where that piece is supposed to go without affecting the two corners that are next to the other edge piece on your right side. And what that basically allows you to do is you can memorize, when you're looking at the cube, you can memorize a route where your starting piece, which is, I forget the actual term that people use, like it's not a commutator, your buffer piece, there we go.
Okay.
Your buffer piece, which is that between, you can always choose where to shoot that. And you can do a setup move, do your T-perm, and undo the setup move. And so you memorize a route around the cube. Now, again, this sounds very complicated.
It does sound very complicated.
Suffice it to say, you can solve all of your edges using about 12 steps, because there's 12 edges, maybe a little more if there's parity, maybe a little less if some are already solved.
Right.
And when you do that, as long as you undo your setup move properly, you will never mess up those two corners except switching them back and forth. And if you do the setup moves right, everything else that you would mess up, you've already undone with the setup moves. So all of the corners will stay put. All of your solved pieces will stay put. The only pieces you're actually moving are the ones that you're trying to move.
That's so convenient.
And so the way that you do that is you solve all of your edges, and then there's a very similar one where two edge pieces will swap back and forth, and you can move a corner around. It's very similar to the T-perm, but this time the corner is completely free while the other three pieces are really close together.
Okay.
So here you can swap out the corner with all the rest, and this is what's known as a Y-perm. Or you can use a J-perm if you're fancy. Like I tried to use the J-perm because it's easier for me sometimes. But here you can not mess up anything except for the two corners that you want, and you keep swapping the two edges back and forth and never mess those two up either. So in that sense, once you've memorized a route, again, this is complicated to explain, but it's not as hard actually to do. I say that, but it was hard for me to learn, kind of.
I mean, it's a Rubik's Cube.
Right, but it's one of those things where if you can memorize that route, and then the easy way for memorization is you assign like a letter to everything. So like on your top face for your corners, you've got A, B, C, D. And then you go the front face corners is E, F, G, H if you go like clockwise or something like that.
Okay.
So you only have to memorize like at most 8 or 9 letters, and you apply words or images to them for the corners, and then like 12 or 13 for the edges. And so if you can remember like 2 sentences or like, 7 or 8 words and just keep that in your memory, then when you go back through with the blindfold on, you're not trying to remember specific moves that you have to do. You're trying to remember these letters. And if you can remember the letters will tell you what setup you have to do and what
Wow.
things. And so there's a whole bunch of memory tricks.
Yeah,
here.
there's a lot more choreography to solving a Rubik's Cube than I ever would have guessed.
And I'd love to show you with an actual example, but because this is a podcast, I'll just try to describe it.
Well, maybe
But
we'll have to record a video of us solving Rubik's Cubes.
just make it a tutorial. But this is actually a great point. I want to transition into talking about some of the famous like cubers, some of like the world's best cubers. And one of my favorite cubers, or like one of the, my favorites is like a celebrity, even though he's not really a celebrity.
He's a folk hero.
Sure, we'll go with that. Is a Polish cuber named Marcin Masko Kowalczyk or something like that. Kowalczyk. He goes by Maskow. That's his like nickname or his middle name or something like that.
There you go.
He has
What a
one of
name.
the best memories in the world. Like he's one of those people that can compete in like the memory championships, where like you memorize a deck of cards as quickly as possible, or you memorize people's faces.
That's
or
a
things
thing?
Like that. It is. I know very little about it, except that he does it as well.
Fair enough.
But they have competitions but it's all that same sort of memory trick where you have to remember, you're not remembering specifically what you're trying to remember. You associate what you're trying to remember with letters or images or pictures or symbols. And then when you can recall those symbols, those tell you what you were trying to remember. That's like, it's a memory trick. So like if you're familiar with, let's go BBC Sherlock, you know how he has a mind palace?
Yes.
This is a similar concept, except that the way they dramatize the mind palace is a little bit different than how it's actually done.
Sure.
But it's kind of, well, picture this. If you're trying to memorize a deck of cards and you have your house in your mind. So you're walking through your house. In the first room of your house, you have a jack of spades. And the jack of spades to you always reminds you of your coworker, Jack, who lives in a box or something like that. I don't know. So you have a jack in a box in your first room. Okay, and then you go to the next room of your house and you place another item there that means something else. Like, you've got Alice in Wonderland because the Queen of Hearts was your next card or something like that,
Okay.
So then if you're trying to remember this deck of cards, all you have to do is walk back through your house and remember, oh, in this first room was a jack in the box, which to me means the jack of spades. Oh, in this next room was a Queen of Hearts because Alice in Wonderland was in this room,
Right.
So that's kind of how it works, except that they are infinitely better at it than I am because my memory is not nearly as good as theirs
Oh,
is.
mine either.
But so in a cubing sense, Maskow is one of the best multi-blind cubers and 3x3 cubers and really any blindfold cuber there is.
Multi-blind.
Multi-blind. That's an event I haven't touched
So
on.
that's solving multiple blindfolded cubes or cubes
Yes.
while blindfolded?
Yes. So first of all, he had for a while the world record for just single blindfolded, where he memorized it and then solved it all in the space of about 20 seconds. Like his memorization was about 8 seconds. He also still has the fastest, as far as I know, the fastest unofficial, meaning in practice, like on YouTube, solved with 16 seconds.
Wow.
Whereas the current world record is 18 to memorize and solve all in the same time limit for just a Rubik's Cube. And he's held the multi-blind world record since 2013.
Wow.
And the way multi-blind works, you get an hour and you can choose as many cubes as you want. Now, if you choose less than 6, you're only going to get 10 minutes per cube. So if you choose 3 cubes, you only get half an hour. If you choose 2 cubes, which I think you have to choose at least 2, you can't choose just 1 because that's a different event, then you only get 20 minutes. But once you get up to an hour, then if you add more cubes, you're still going to stay at an hour. So for example, for him setting the world record, he went with 41 puzzles.
41?
41. And
Oh
basically
my
what he did is
gosh.
he spent the first like 35-ish, 30-some minutes just memorizing all of them. And that's him remembering different symbols or names or letters or whatever and putting them in his memory palace, per se.
Wow.
And then as soon as he was ready, after 30-some minutes, he pulls down the blindfold. Someone sticks a piece of paper in front of him, which actually is his wife because she likes to help out and she's also interested in this thing, which is great.
Oh, that helps.
But then he can't remove the blindfold until he's done. So he solves all of them with the blindfold on. And he solved all 41 of them. And he set a new world record.
Wow.
Actually, he set his own world record again because he'd gone up from like 22 to 25 to 33 to 36 or something like that.
So he broke his own world record.
Yeah, and no one else, a couple people have come like close, but no one has beaten it. And he took a couple years off and came back and did the World Championships in Paris in 2017 and still got second place because even though he hadn't practiced, he's just that good. He's ridiculous.
Wow.
He felt like he didn't even do very well, and he still got second place at the World Championships of all
I wish
things.
I could do that well.
I wish I could do
not
that.
practicing.
I know. I wish I could do memory blind or multi-blind at all. So he's one of my favorite cubers because he's just ridiculous at what he does. He also has a YouTube video where he did eating a banana quickly, a mean of 3, where he just tried his best to eat a banana, like an entire banana. Like he unpeels it and eats it on the same like timer as a Rubik's Cube, which is kind of fun.
I feel like we need to get one of those timer pads and just goof around with it. That'd be a video again, but that would be really funny.
All right. Other cubers that I really enjoy or like enjoy watching and their content. One of the most famous cubers, I mentioned him before, is Felix Zemdegs. He's been cubing
Yeah.
since, I think, 2009. He currently holds the 3x3 world record average, which, to quickly throw this out there, the world record single is where you have your fastest solve, and that's just what that is. World record average, in a competition setting, you get 5 solves, and actually you get the exact same scrambles as everybody else does for those 5 solves for that round.
Oh, okay.
So that way, in one round, somebody won't get a lucky solve that someone else doesn't get. Everybody would get that same lucky solve if they had a lucky solve, or everyone gets
Gotcha.
the exact same 5 scrambles. On 6x6 and 7x7 and other harder events, you only get 3 because it takes a lot longer.
Well, yeah.
So for Rubik's Cube, the way they do an average of 5 is if you have a really fast solve, they don't count it. If you have a really slow solve, they don't count it. The other 3, they do. So for example, if you were to have an extremely lucky solve where you skipped like all of the steps and it took you like 3 seconds, which hasn't happened yet in competition, but it still might, you never know. That would be your world record single, but it's not going to count for your average. It'll be your fastest solve. Now, if you do have a solve elsewhere where like your cube explodes, you do have to put it back together before you can like count it as solved. So if it does pop,
Cubes can explode?
if you have them too loose, they can explode, which is an entirely different aspect of the video. Some have magnets in them to help reduce that.
Wow.
But anyways, but so if you have a really slow solve, they don't count it. Really fast solve, they don't count it. So in order to have a very good average, the middle 3 all have to be really good. So you have to have at least 4 good solves. Your slowest one will not affect your average, nor will your fastest. So having the world record average for any event is almost more prestigious than actually having the single, because instead of having a lucky solve, you had at least 4 lucky solves, which generally means you're actually talented.
It's a little bit harder, I think.
A lot harder, actually. Like my fastest single on 3x3 or Rubik's Cube is 11.5, but my fastest average is 14.6 because I cannot consistently do 11-second solves 5 in a row at a competition. Now, admittedly, I've only done like 4 rounds in 2 competitions, so I have a lot
Fair enough.
I have a lot more opportunity to get faster. But you have to have 4 official good solves for you to have a good average. And his world record average right now is like 5.8 seconds.
5 seconds?
Yeah, he's the only person to have an average, and he's done it twice now, under 6 seconds. He was also the first person to go under 7 way back when, and then before that, under 8 and under 9 and whatnot. He's been pushing the world record average down ever since like 8 or 9 seconds, I think, which was like 2011. And he's been working it all the way down. He's basically held on to that. One other person had it for a bit, but then he got it back right away. He's also had the world record single many times. His fastest in competition is 4.73, which is just his fastest solve. That's currently number 4 in the world. And the guy from Xenia that I mentioned, who's the Pyraminx world record holder, Drew Brads, has a 4.76, which is like 6th in the world. So that shows how close some of the competition is.
5 seconds to solve a Rubik's Cube.
The world record is 4.59. That's the current world record as of like a couple weeks ago, I think, from when we're recording this. No, and my fastest unofficial solve is 7.16, and I would be ranked like 300th in the world if I had that officially, because that's how many people are that fast.
Wow.
Currently, I'm ranked like 6,000th with my 11. So, yeah, I'm not as fast as I'd like to be. I'm still decently fast, but if I took every event and got twice as fast, or could do everything in half the time, I would still not be the best in the world at my event. I would be like close, but I wouldn't quite be there because I'm just that slow compared to other people.
You rank though. I mean, that's more than I can say.
Yes. The only reason I rank is because I've been to a competition. If you went to a competition and all you did was solve a Rubik's Cube and you did it in 8 minutes, which is legal because the timer itself shuts off after 10 minutes. But if you did it in 8 minutes, you would still be ranked. You might be ranked like 70,000th in the world or something like that, but you would still technically be ranked. Now, there's only like 80,000 people that have actually done it officially, I think. So you'd be on the low end because most people aren't slower than 8 minutes. But the thing is, like the method that I was just describing earlier, the easier method, the one that I showed my girlfriend over the summer, allows you to do it in like 2 or 3 minutes. No problem. You don't even have to try for speed. And actually, I had her race against me a couple of times for the fun of it, and she would do it in like 2:30 or 2:45 or something like that.
That's still not too bad.
Now, I would be solving a 5x5, of course, so to make it more of a fair competition, which it was really close, which was kind of fun. Other cubers that I like, just trying to get back on topic here, there's a guy from the Netherlands whose name is Mats Valk. He's very, very good at 3x3 as well. He was the first person to take Felix's world record single that he had for like 3 years. Felix had a 5.66 back in 2011 or 12, and Mats Valk finally got a 5.55 to beat it. And that was, both of them have had very long-standing world records at the time. There's another guy whose name is Lucas Etter. He's from Pennsylvania. I met him at a competition. He and Drew Brads are pretty good friends, I think. He was the first person to have an official sub-5 single on Rubik's Cube. He had a 4.9, which was the world record last year sometime, last September. No, that's not right. Last summer, I think. I'm not actually sure.
Sometime last year.
There's a bunch of other cubers though. There's a guy named Simon Westland who's very good at Megaminx, or he was the Megaminx world record holder a while back. There's a guy
Spanish name?
There's a guy whose name is Spanish. It's a Juan, like Juan Key or something like that. I don't remember. He's the first person to go under 30 seconds on the Megaminx, with my best being like a minute 42, so I'm way behind. Another guy that I really like, there's a guy named Max Park. He actually has, I think he has like autism or something like that. He's from the US, even though he looks like an Asian. That's what he looks like, but he's from the US. He currently is the current world record. No, he's the current world champion, like at the 2017 Paris like World Championships.
Oh.
He managed to win 3x3 because Felix actually, well, everyone expected Felix to win, but Felix had a bad day.
Oh.
Sadly, having set like 6 world records in other events right before that. He then didn't do very well on 3x3. He still got 4th. But Max Park is the current reigning world champion. He's also like number 3 in the world or something like that. Another guy I touched on earlier that I wanted to come back to for sure is Kevin Heyyy. He's one of the US's best and the world's best big cubers, which means 5x5 through 7x7.
Okay, those big cubes. All right.
That's what people refer to as big cubes. Kevin Heyyy is the 3-time world champion, with world championships happening every other year. He's the 3-time world champion on 6x6, and he's the only person ever to be the world champion in the same competition on 5x5, 6x6, and 7x7. He's also held many world records in all of those, though currently Felix is a little faster on all of them, but Kevin is number 2 or 3. Max Park is actually getting really fast at all of these as well, but Kevin and Felix have a great rivalry because they do what's called a 2 through 7 relay, where you have them all scrambled 2x2 all the way through 7x7. There's no 1x1.
There's a 2x2 though?
Right. It looks like just the corners.
Oh,
it's literally
okay.
just corners. It's very easy to solve, but you also still have to know how to solve a Rubik's Cube to solve it.
Right.
There's no 1x1 that you can actually scramble because it's like a dice, basically.
Yeah.
I have
Yeah,
a
at that
couple.
point.
I have a couple just for the fun of it, but there's no real puzzle there. It's very confusing to people who aren't cubers, though. It's a lot of fun to see their reactions. But what they do, Kevin and Felix will both do, it's a 2 through 7 relay where they start with their 2x2, and as soon as they solve it, they go to 3x3 and then all the way up to 7, or sometimes a little out of order, and they don't hit the space bar, or like they don't stop their timer or whatever they're doing until they're done with all of them. And they always try to break the world record there. It's always an unofficial world record because there's no competition event for that specifically.
That sounds like a problem that needs to be fixed.
I know, they really should do that in competition, but very few
Yeah.
people would be able to do it on a stack mat just because of how fast you have to be at all of them to do it so quickly. Like most people, like I myself, can do it in just under 12 minutes, and a stack mat shuts off after 10. So I would have a lot of work to do in order to do that on a stack mat.
Yeah.
But Kevin currently has the fastest unofficial world record for 2 through 7. He did a 5:11. Felix did a 5:12.3, and then just recently Max Park did a 5:12.6 or something like that. So it's so close together. It used to be just Felix and Kevin, but now it's also Max Park. Kevin Heyyy. He's from Oregon or Washington or somewhere around there. He's a good swimmer as well, and he's also really, really, like, he looks really muscular.
Can he swim and
is?
solve a Rubik's Cube at the same time?
Yes. Not only that,
What?
he has the world record unofficially for solving like 2x2 up through 4x4 underwater in one breath.
Underwater.
Because he can hold his breath for like 2 or 3 minutes
I
if
was
he needs to.
joking, but wow.
No, I'm serious. I mean, you have to do it with like a cube that's not your best because the water really messes up with the cubes. But he solves cubes underwater, and that's one of his most popular videos. He also has the Guinness World Record for most Rubik's Cubes solved underwater in one breath. I believe he solved 8 in one breath, which took him like 2.5 minutes or something like that. So
even so, that's a long time to hold your breath.
I know, and you have to be not only a fast cuber, like he's one of the best cubers, in his own respective way. Not only do you have to be super fast, but you also have to be a swimmer as well.
Yeah.
Which is entirely unrelted. But, he does both, and so he combined them both and has the world record there. So, yeah. That's a little bit about speed cubing, I
Wow.
guess. It was kind of a long episode, but that's okay. I guess these explain episodes will go a little longer, but that's how it
I
is.
mean, it's hard to explain something as complicated as
know.
speed cubing or Mass Effect.
And one of the problems with these explain episodes is it's usually something that one of us is extremely passionate about. So whether or not
Or just knows a lot about.
So whether or not we sound excited about it, we're basically geeking out about things just on microphone, which is the greatest ever. So
yeah.
I've just been over here talking about one of my favorite things ever, and you're just over there listening is the greatest thing. So I'm really enjoying it. We need to do this more often.
Well, you said big cube earlier, and I immediately, I pictured a 2-foot-high Rubik's Cube.
No, but I just want to touch on that quick before we end the episode. There are other types of quote-unquote big cubes in a couple different senses. Like If you get them 3D printed, you can get it all the way up to a 17 by 17 or a 22 by 22, which
I don't even want to think about that.
I know. The problem is a guy trying to build a 22 by 22 on a live stream, he was almost done with it and it exploded.
Oh no.
Which was just the worst thing ever because there's like thousands of little pieces. But they've mass produced up to a 13 by 13 and they're trying to come out with 15s and 17s, I think, at some point, which will be really expensive. Like the 13 by 13 is like $300 or $400, which I do not have. A friend of mine here at Seasonville does have, though, because he won. I think he won a competition or something, or got prize money or something like that. And so he just went ahead and bought that cube.
Fair enough.
Which it's a lot of fun to mess around with, but it takes like an hour to solve. So, and then the other sense of big cube, there's a guy named Tony Fisher who does a lot of like custom puzzle modding and building and things like that. So he builds his own puzzles. Not only does he build puzzles that look like barrels or things like that with a lot of stickers and whatnot, he also builds large Rubik's cubes in the sense that he's built one that's like 5 or 6 or 7 feet high. And whatnot. So it's like one of the largest Rubik's cubes in the world. He has the world record for
like
that.
a small house.
You could almost live in it. It's bigger than a lot of like refrigerator boxes and things like that.
I want a chair made out of a Rubik's cube now.
Or get one of those chairs that like has all the compartments where you can store all your books.
Yeah.
Entirely unrelated, but that's what that reminded me of. But that's another kind of big cube where they literally have them that are like 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 feet high. They're just,
wow.
You have to build it yourself basically. So, all right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the episode. So since I've been talking for a lot, since it's a lot of me explaining, what note do you want to do?
Oh, let's end on an A.
An A. All right. Would you like to do the tonic or?
You know, actually, I will. I don't usually do the tonic note, but
That's
for this one, yeah, I'll do the tonic, and then you can build on top of that. How about that?
Okay. How about if we do or not an arpeggio, but like we build it where you sing goodbye and then I'll sing goodbye a little after, rather than doing it the same chord just for the fun of it.
Okay.
So you sing an A, I guess an A3, and then I'll just pick a random note above it that'll harmonize.
All right. Goodbye.
Goodbye.